got this out of the pickle, and the places that I saw were problematic. So the first thing that I want to do here, there's a spot here and there's a spot here. I want to come and I want to tap this wire down really well with my rawhide mallet or my nylon mallet, so I'm not distorting it. And this is the time if those beads were going to come off, they would have come off. And now I'm going to use my Scotch-Brite pad to clean up the area that needs resoldering. There are other ways to clean things than just by hand in Scotch-Brite, but once again, it's like you don't have to have a lot of tools if you do a lot of handwork. Not necessarily the best for production, but it's good for learning how and not having to buy a bunch of tools.
Also, maybe talk about the color.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So after soldering this brass, you can see that it's pretty copper color. And that is because brass is 70% copper and 30% zinc. And zinc melts at a much lower temperature. So in the heating process, what we did is we burnt off some of the zinc and we've left a copper surface on here. It's really pretty thin. So I can come back in and I can sand away that copper surface. You can see that starting to go away. When I learned about this, I realized that I could do a textured surface, heat up the brass, have the copper come to the surface, and then I could sand the top off so I would have the color of copper and brass, which is pretty interesting. So yes, it's one of those limitations with working with brass. But it's also something that you could take advantage of. And then a little bit later in the quarter, we'll be showing you how we can, instead of filing or sanding it off, we can etch it off. But this is very common when you work with brass and also nickel silver. You can see that it's pretty coppery. So, okay, so I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna flux pretty much the whole seam. This is flat, the chances of it falling off while it's sitting here, and I'm going to do it down on the board. I always was frustrated when I had to go back in and resolder something until I realized that that wire is partially soldered down and heat transfers across solder joints. So this is going to be easier to solder this time than it was the last time. So you've got some things going for you on it when you come back in and resolder. But if it's partially soldered down, you're gonna still have to think about which piece is bigger, which one is the metal that conducts heat, which one isn't the one that conducts heat. But I still think that you should know that it's going to be easier no matter what this next time around. So I know I needed it here, right? And I know I needed it along here. And you noticed how big these pieces are? That's because I'm hoping that they're going to travel a ways. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking I should put it on this side. It'd be easier to clean up. And I think it was right here. And if I were smart, I would make this curved piece of solder fit that curve, because then there'll be less cleanup right on that edge. Okay. And in the beginning, people want to use their most dominant hand while they're soldering. You're going to want to get to the point where you switch over and get comfortable using it in your non-dominant hand. I always talk about breaking my arm as a kid, so I had to learn to write with my left hand, and I think it's made me a better jeweler because I'm pretty ambidextrous. But now I have my tweezers in this hand if I need to push down, or if I need to move my solder somewhere, or if I need to add another piece of solder. And you can see everything's just boiling all over the place. So if your flux is not as thin as mine, you'll have less water, which will be less problematic. So I'm really focusing on the plate, not the wire. Watching what's happening with the flux. And it's starting to turn clear everywhere. This is the first time I really melted something was when I was trying to put a piece of solder back in place. And I wasn't looking at where my torch was. I was looking at my tweezers and I melted part of my silver. So when you do stop to work on something, sometimes it's best just to pull the flame away. I'm also somebody who kind of likes to start at one end of a solder joint and work my way down. So I'm gonna, now that I've got the flux clear, I'm gonna start here. And I'm gonna start to try to get this to flow. And it's starting to flow as it comes down. So I need to push down a little bit on that. Solder's flowing there. Coming along, flowing there. So this is getting pretty hot. I'm gonna actually come back and work my way back down around to see if I can get the solder to travel even farther, because I think it's not down here. Could I add another piece of solder? I think it's a little dirty, but I think that that's down at this point. When you're working with silver, you never want to see your metal that red hot because it's going to melt, but with these metals here, it's okay. The one thing I did want to show you, and I'm going to improvise, I'm going to put some flux on the end of this wire, and I'm going to take my tweezers and I'll hold this thing upright. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to melt a ball on the end of it. And then I'm going to pull the flame away nice and slow. So I get a lot of people that come that have been beaters, and they are surprised that they can make their own little knobs on the end of their wire. So I'm going to do that again with this one, just so you guys can see one more time. Because one of the things is if I do it this way, it's going to be a really nice teardrop shape. And if I pull it away slowly, it's a little better. Fine silver works better. But watch what happens if I heat it this way. I don't want to get the, there we go. Watch how it drops with gravity. And now it's hanging down off the side. And then should I just keep going till it falls off?
Sure.
Okay. When you see the blue smoke, oh come on, it's not going to fall off.
Tip it down.
Ah, finally. Okay. So I hope you guys will be willing to experiment and try some things out. Don't hurt yourself. But now I've got this little splat of nickel silver, and I've got a much shorter pin here. But I think it's important to see what the melting temperatures are and see how fluid the metal melts, and when you have to get out quickly and all of that. So air off and then gas. And then I'm going to throw this into the water. And we can look at it. It's got a ton of copper back on it. I'm going to put it in the pickle and leave it longer and then check to see if it's soldered all the way down. Because one of the things that I would like us to do with our solder joints is after we make our sweat solder and once we make our wire to sheet, I want to show you guys how to roll it through the rolling mill, and it's a really great way to test your solder joints.